Imagine promising someone the keys to a shiny new kingdom, only to secretly hand the map to your buddy and whisper, "We'll split it later." Welcome to the post-World War I Middle East, where double-dealing wasn't just a strategy, it was practically a sport. Buckle up, because this tale has more twists than a desert sandstorm. The Middle East before World War I. The Ottoman Empire's legacy. Before World War I, the Middle East was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire, an age-old power spanning North Africa to Eastern Europe. By the early 20th century, however, it was dubbed the sick man of Europe, weakened by internal dissent, economic troubles, and administrative challenges. This empire was a mosaic of ethnicities: Arabs, Kurds, Armenians, Greeks, and Turks, often with clashing interests. European powers saw the Ottoman lands as valuable assets. Britain focused on Egypt and Gulf routes vital for trade with India. Russia sought Constantinople, and France aimed to protect Middle Eastern Catholics. When the Ottomans allied with Germany in 1914, the region became a key theater of European power struggles, competing European interests and strategic motives. The Middle East was central to World War I as European powers vie for influence. Germany's Berlin to Baghdad Railway was a strategic project that alarmed Britain and its allies. Russia aimed to extend its pan-Slavic influence and protect Orthodox Christians under Ottoman rule, while France sought to maintain its hold over regions with significant Christian communities, like Lebanon and Syria. Britain's priority was securing the Suez Canal, vital for its trade route to India. When the Ottomans joined the Central Powers, the region became a focal point for espionage, revolts, and proxy conflicts, turning it into a real-life geopolitical chessboard. The Hashemite Revolt and the promise of an Arab kingdom. Amidst the war, Britain saw an opportunity to weaken the Ottoman Empire from within by aligning with discontented Arab leaders. The Hashemite family, rulers of the Hijaz region, today part of Saudi Arabia, seemed the perfect partners. Led by Sharif Hussein ibn Ali, the Hashemites had both religious and tribal influence. In 1915, Britain promised Hussein an independent Arab kingdom stretching from the Arabian Peninsula to present-day Iraq and Syria if he led a revolt against the Ottomans. The deal, however, was as clear as a mirage in the desert. The British kept the language vague, giving themselves wiggle room while Hussein's hopes soared. Fueled by a vision of Arab unity and independence, Hussein and his sons, Faisal and Abdullah, took up arms in 1916, supported by British intelligence officer T.E. Lawrence, known famously as Lawrence of Arabia. The revolt, though not a military game-changer, had significant symbolic weight, setting high expectations for post-war independence. The secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, dividing the spoils. While the Hashemites waged their campaign against the Ottomans, British and French diplomats were busy drawing lines on a map in secret. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 carved the Ottoman Empire's Arab provinces into British and French spheres of influence. Under this deal, France would control Syria and Lebanon, while Britain would oversee Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine. The Hashemites, meanwhile, would get, well, a big surprise when they found out. This agreement stood in stark contradiction to the promises made to Hussein. The ink on the map was barely dry when it became clear that any independent Arab state would be under European influence, not self-governing. The Sykes-Picot Agreement laid the groundwork for decades of mistrust and conflict, planting the seeds for future confrontations over who truly had a right to the land. The Balfour Declaration and Zionist aspirations. If the Sykes-Picot Agreement wasn't complicated enough, Britain added another layer of intrigue in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. Issued by Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, the declaration supported the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, so long as it did not prejudice the rights of the non-Jewish communities already there. This was Britain's way of rallying global Jewish support during the war, especially from influential Jewish communities in the United States and Europe. Zionist aspirations for a Jewish homeland were not new. The movement, spearheaded by figures like Theodor Herzl, had gained momentum in the late 19th century, and Jewish migration to Palestine had already begun. However, the Balfour Declaration raised expectations among Zionist leaders, while alarming the Arab population, who saw their future being written without them. The ambiguity of what national home meant would later lead to significant conflict. The American influence and the League of Nations mandates. After the war, the newly established League of Nations introduced the concept of mandates, territories that would be administered by Western powers until they were ready for independence. President Woodrow Wilson's principle of self-determination was well received in theory, but was difficult to implement in practice. The Middle East patchwork of tribes, religions, and loyalties made drawing national boundaries a near impossible task. Britain and France were appointed as mandate powers. France took control of Syria and Lebanon, while Britain assumed control over Iraq, Palestine, and Transjordan. This move was sold as a pathway to eventual independence, but was more a thinly veiled continuation of colonial rule. Many in the region felt betrayed by the mandate system, which seemed to disregard the wartime promises of independence and self-rule. Revolts and resistance movements. The post-war years saw widespread unrest in the Middle East. In Iraq, discontent over British rule led to the 1920 Iraqi Revolt, marked by fierce tribal resistance and significant casualties before it was suppressed. In Syria, King Faisal, crowned by Arab nationalists, was ousted after France refused to recognize his authority, culminating in the Battle of Mazalin in 1920. His defeat symbolized dashed Arab hopes for independence. Palestine also faced turmoil as tensions between Jewish settlers and Arabs escalated into the deadly 1921 Jaffa riots, sparked by a minor altercation. The British response, which reinforced their commitment to Zionist policies, deepened the division between Jewish and Arab communities and set a precedent for ongoing conflict. The Cairo Conference and the creation of new states. In 1921, British officials, including Winston Churchill, convened the Cairo Conference to decide the future governance of the newly acquired mandates. The result was the creation of new political entities: Iraq, under King Faisal; Transjordan, ruled by his brother Abdullah; and the continued support for Zionist immigration to Palestine. These new states were nominally independent but heavily influenced by British policy. The conference attempted to placate Arab nationalists while maintaining British strategic interests. Iraq, for example, gained a king but not true sovereignty. It remained under British oversight, with British advisors embedded in the government. The new state of Transjordan, though ruled by Abdullah, was a buffer zone to protect British interests against potential French encroachment from Syria. These arrangements gave the appearance of progress, but were ultimately a facade for continued Western control. Palestine, a brewing storm. Palestine was perhaps the most volatile of all. The British Mandate incorporated the Balfour Declaration, and Jewish immigration surged in the post-war years. International Jewish organizations facilitated the purchase of land, sometimes displacing Arab tenants, and tensions escalated as both communities became increasingly wary of each other. The British administration, caught between its commitments to the Zionist movement and the growing anger of the Arab population, struggled to maintain peace. The conflict in Palestine was not just about land, but also identity and political power. For the Jewish immigrants, it was a return to an ancestral homeland and a fulfillment of the Zionist dream. For the Arab population, it was an existential threat that challenged their claim to the land and way of life. The seeds sown in the early 1920s would sprout into decades of strife, contributing to a century of conflict over national identity and sovereignty. The legacy of World War I: fragile foundations and uncertain futures. By 1923, the Middle East political landscape had been transformed. The Treaty of Lausanne formally dissolved the Ottoman Empire, and the new states carved out of its remnants were on their way to independence, at least on paper. In reality, these states were bound by mandates that favored European interests over local governance. The promises of Arab independence made during the war were largely unfulfilled, replaced by a patchwork of colonial rule, nationalist aspirations, and conflicting international promises. The artificial boundaries drawn by diplomats in far-off capitals created states that often ignored ethnic, religious, and historical realities. This legacy of arbitrary borders and broken promises has left a profound impact on the Middle East, contributing to conflicts that persist to this day. The post-World War I arrangements did more than create new states. They set the stage for a century of geopolitical rivalry, internal strife, and battles over identity and power. Thanks for diving into the complex history of the Middle East with us. If you found this journey as eye-opening as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that unveil the past and shape our future. See you in the next video.